Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Pikarski, and I give Dharma talks and teach meditation at the Blue Lotus Meditation Center here in Venice, Florida. Welcome. Today, we're going to talk about selflessness and awareness, and we're particularly going to talk about the not this, not that exercise, or neti neti, which is a very important exercise to be able to distinguish yourself from what you are not. So one of the ways of finding your true nature is to be able to find out what you are not. That means to disidentify with the objects that we have taken ourselves to be, the false objects. So we have to question our existence at a very fundamental level. We must do this basically through direct experience and set aside our concepts and the conclusions about life we take for granted because of the conditioning we receive from everybody around us and just the conditioning of thought. Thought tends to condition us. So this conditioning goes very deep and is very challenging. And this is one of the reasons these exercises are important. Neti neti is used in Hinduism and Buddhism. It's a very direct method. It's a direct method because it's really trying to expose for you your true nature. Many people have awakened through this particular method, maybe more than any other method. So I want to share some understandings about identity. And you may not understand all this completely. Bear with me. It takes years of contemplation to really get this stuff extremely clear. Some people are lucky and they just get it right off the bat, but most of us, like myself, had to take decades of contemplation. So we're beginning to question something that we normally don't question at all. So one thing is that we cannot be anything that is an object. An object is a chair, a computer screen, a thought. It's something outside of us. And because it's something outside of us, it can't be us. We're the one that's noticing this object. We're the one that's seeing this object. So even thoughts, feelings, and moods are objects because they're objects in our mind. We can see them pass through. So one of the main problems that creates suffering in our lives is that we cling on to these objects. We have false conceptions of who we are. We cling on to a concept of self that's limited, that's distorted, that and it eventually creates a lot of suffering for ourselves. So this clinging creates a deep sense of anxiety and limitation. So we are basically unaware of what we cling to. We're unaware of how we have established an identity that is false. So we need to look at this. We cling to a lot of ideas about ourselves. Now, it's a very subtle distinction we have to make here. All these ideas about myself, like my age, my gender, my personality, tendencies, traits I may have, all these things can be very factual. And they're not a problem. The problem is not the fact part of it. The problem is that I cling on to these for identity. I somehow see them as identity. So these ideas are functional. I live in Venice, Florida, etc., etc. I need to know these things. So when I identify with something, what happens is that I go farther than just recognizing it. I go farther than just using it as information. I cling on to it as an identity. When I cling on to it as an identity, I become attached to it. I no longer use the ideas to just function in the world. I believe them, and I limit myself in this way. So, and this is the problem with all thought. Anytime we have thoughts about ourselves, they can be functional and help us function in the world, or they can condition us because we believe them. And, any thought that's repeated to ourselves over and over and over again, it tends to create conditioning. So take for instance, if I see myself as a man. Okay, that's very practical because I know, how my body's constructed basically and my gender, and I can fill out a form and put my gender down and all that. But if I cling to the idea of a man, then maybe I'll get defensive if someone suggests I'm not manly, quote, manly. Um, so what happens is that we start taking ourselves for these objects, these mental objects or these physical objects, like the body. And when I do this, what I'm doing is I'm confusing subject and object. So I'm taking the subject, which is awareness, to be a thing. So, for instance, I'm told that awareness is who I am. You run into this a lot in spiritual teachings. And when you're told awareness is what you are, it's easy to change that into an object. We imagine an entity, perhaps an image of myself, and oh, that's awareness. And if I take awareness as me, then I'll see it as something that changes too. Oh, sometimes I'm very aware and sometimes I'm not that aware. When I say sometimes I am aware, I is still not awareness. I is something that's noticing awareness. So I haven't come to the understanding that I truly am awareness. So when I'm in a good mood or my mood feels expansive, I feel very aware. And when I'm not feeling very aware, I may feel contracted or upset or something like that. These relative changes in awareness are not the awareness we're talking about. That's just using awareness as an object. We think we are looking and examining awareness. However, awareness is what is looking, not what is being looked at. And so this is the problem with the subject-object shift, is that whenever we look at the subject, we put out another object that we focus on, because we're deeply conditioned to look for objects. So initially the mind is so conditioned to look for objects that when you ask someone to see their awareness or their true subjectivity, they just bring up an image or thought in their mind, and they assume this to be the awareness. So this is deeply conditioned in us. As a matter of fact, we're deeply conditioned to look for objects in the world for survival. And on a practical level, this works, but on a level of deep contemplation of who we are, it really gets in the way. True subjectivity is incredibly elusive because this deep-seated tendency to always search for an object. If I'm always searching for an object and creating an object, it's very difficult for me to get in touch with subjectivity. When we become conscious of awareness, instead of seeing an object, we become aware of the conscious space that we are. So when we're actually aware of our awareness, we're not aware of any object. We're actually just aware that we are kind of like a conscious space in which everything appears. And this conscious space is not an object because it is what is witnessing everything. Because it's what is witnessing everything, it's kind of a deep subjectivity. But even these terms don't really apply anymore, because when you're really being aware of awareness, we're beyond the normal dualities of the mind, like subject and object. So we are conditioned to see objects out there, and we're looking at them from in here. This creates a separation and a gap between ourselves and others. We don't see that this gap is just imposed by thought. In other words, I name it, that and this, me and other. And also there's other constructs like in here and out there. Subject and object, self and others, all these dualities are determined by thought. In our direct experience, we can find no line separating out there from in here, no line separating subject from object. The only thing that separates subject and object is our thought, subject and object. So we label things, and this breaks up the wholeness into a very unsatisfying duality. Saddled with this painful separation, we mistakenly try to get back to wholeness by finding something outside for us to join with. Maybe it's food, romance, or money. If I just get enough of this, then I'll feel whole again. So due to this separation, due to constructing ourselves in the faulty world of thought, obsession and psychological desire arises. Obsession and psychological desires are mistaken paths to try to right the separation so that we can come back to completeness or wholeness. We also get confused by taking the object to be the subject. We see a body and we think it is us. We see the operation of our mind, thoughts, feelings, moods, etc. They appear as a concept, either a word or image, and we take these things to be us. We don't realize that these things cannot be the subject because they are appearing in awareness as an object. So this is the basic exercise of neti neti, a very famous exercise, particularly in Advaita Vedanta, which is very closely associated with Buddhism, at least in its methods and its outlook. So neti neti, not this, not that, we'll do it with objects. So the idea is that we cannot be anything that is an object in consciousness because we are what's seeing. I am not this, whatever it is, because this is an object in consciousness. So let's take each of the following and see how this works. So our body. So we take our body, but the thing about body is that the only way we know body is an object in consciousness. It's either an image of our body that we see, or it's a set of perceptions like feeling and position in space and all these things that are objects in my consciousness. So we take these things that are object and we take them as us, but we never consider what is it that's experiencing these things? What is it that's able to even distinguish these things that must be somehow greater than them? My name, my name Jim, it's just a word. That's all it is. It's an object in my mind. All the thoughts I have about myself are objects in my mind. They're just passing thoughts, such as man, women, traits, tendencies, desires, moods. I am not any of these things because I am what is seeing this. I'm not this because I am what is aware of this. If we can see them, then the seeing, which is awareness, is different than these objects. We are pure subjectivity. So let's just take an example of your name. Just say your name slowly to yourself over and over again, and just see what's associated with your name. So just say it to yourself, like I would say Jim, Jim, and notice what feelings, thoughts, images come up. And when I notice these things coming up, I can tell that they're not me. And they're not me because they're just objects in my consciousness. There's an awareness that they are arising in. That awareness is who I truly am. I am the true subject. So what we want to do is we want to use this as self-exploration. So it's a good exercise to become familiar with and do from time to time, because as you develop your understanding, what will happen is that you'll be able to distinguish these things more and more as time goes on, and you'll be able to disidentify with that which you are not. So we really need to come to a non-conceptual awareness of awareness. A non-conceptual awareness of awareness is that we just see what our awareness is. And it's a different kind of seeing. It's more of an intuitive seeing because there's no subject-object duality in this. Awareness is aware of itself. And when awareness is aware of itself, there's no subject-object duality because subject-object duality has to do with thought. So it can be hard enough just seeing a tree without imposing the word or concept on the tree. But to see a tree freshly, a lot of times we see a tree and immediately we go, oh, there's a tree, it's an oak, da 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 da. And now instead of seeing the tree, we're lost in thought. So it is much harder to do this with our true nature. With our true nature, there's no tree or anything else to focus on. At least with a tree, we can notice the shape and form, and we can notice the greenery or the brown of the bark. And we can focus our attention there. That focus of attention helps us just stay with the tree and not get lost in thought. However, there's no form or color to focus on to see our true nature. So how do you focus on something that has no form or no color? It is what is seeing. And so what is seeing is like you're not looking in a mirror or anything, you're trying to see your eye. Well, how can you see your eye? So the question is, how can you see the pure subject when we are habitually searching for objects? Okay, the mind has a tendency to always search for objects. So how can we change this? How can we do something totally different, totally unique, and be able to see pure subjectivity? How do we focus on a self-aware space with no form and no color? Well, it's just pure presence. It's just pure being. It's just pure awareness. It has no form and color, and yet it has awareness. How do we see the whole when we are always seeking for something specific? Okay, specific means an object. Anything specific is an object. Anything that's the whole is not really an object because it's the whole of awareness. So we are a whole field of awareness. So how do we notice what does not change in all experience when we're conditioned to look for what changes? We're deeply conditioned to look for changes in our environment. That's part of our survival skills, because anything changing could be important for us, either for our survival, positively or negatively. So we're conditioned to look for changes. How do we find that which doesn't change? And particularly when that isn't an object. So in Taoism, they talked about the Tao and how the mind separates into 10,000 things. So we're so absorbed in looking from one of the 10,000 things to the other 10,000 thing that we never look back at what is experiencing all this, because we are pure experiencing. So this wholeness that we are is broken up by our concepts. We're able to discern individual things because we name their shape and form and other qualities. Until this naming occurs, these things just appear as pure sensations perceived by awareness. They're not even separated out because the naming separates them out. In other words, they're just part of the wholeness. It's like an infant. An infant hasn't had their conceptual mind developed yet, so they just see everything. And because they see everything together as a wholeness, they're quite innocent. Jesus said, be like the small child. And that's one of the things we need to get back to be able to perceive the world that way. It's interesting, if we can get back to perceiving the world that way, we still retain all the ability to function and all the things that our mentality and our conceptual mind has given us. It just, we lose the negative part of it, which is the suffering part of it. So if we're really looking at it, our Our direct experiencing is just awareness and sensations. However, even that is a fabrication because we have to impose concepts on it. Awareness versus sensations. Those are two different concepts. Until we impose those concepts on our direct experience, we don't make a distinction between awareness and sensations. We're just experiencing. So concepts help us function. Without concepts, we cannot act for our own benefit or for the benefit of others in the world. The problem is that we get so conditioned by all this fragmentation that we no longer see the wholeness. And so, if concepts are necessary for functioning, why do we need to see the wholeness? We need to see the wholeness for the sake of happiness and realizing our true nature. Our true nature has the qualities of wisdom, love, impartiality, and when we see our true nature, we end suffering for ourselves. And because we eliminate the grand delusion of defining ourselves in a particular manner. So these two worlds of awareness and the conceptual world that we've designated exist simultaneously. We suffer if we can only experience one of these worlds. As an infant, you suffer from vulnerability because you don't have any conceptual world built up. As an adult, you suffer from all kinds of emotional problems because you believe in a false self and you haven't seen through the structure of your conceptual conditioning. So without this sense of wholeness, we end up deluded. So you might want to play with this. Just notice an object. Notice how you designate the object. Notice how you designate the self according to a concept. And you may even designate the seeing as a concept. And just notice how these designations separate this out. So you're looking at a laptop or computer or whatever. So you're automatically, a lot of times, see the laptop as an object, see yourself as the subject looking at the object. But these designations are after. They occur after the initial experience. The initial experience is just pure experiencing until we break it down. The thing is, we're so conditioned to do this, we tend to break it down into subject-object almost immediately, just how we operate in life. And what we're really trying to do is have a choice. Have a choice not to do this just so automatically. So when you're looking at your computer, like right now, is there any dividing line between yourself and your computer? Can you see that line? No, we just impose that line in thought. It's just a mental construction. So the experience of awareness and the experience of the computer arising in awareness is all one experience. And, so we can play with things like that and experiment, because the thing is, experiment is very important because it goes beyond the words. You really have to see these things operating in your own life. If you see them operating in your own life, then you can transform these understandings to direct experience. And when you transform them to direct experience, then the experiences transform you. So I think we'll continue with this. This is very important, this neti-neti exercise, and being able to distinguish ourselves from the objects in our awareness, which are conceptually designated. And so we'll talk about this more, and we'll also talk about other ways of doing neti-neti, particularly noticing that we are nothing that changes, nothing that comes and goes. Thank you.